So I'm really excited to speak here again at Product School. So thank you to Product School for giving me the opportunity. Before I get started, I wanted to give a brief intro about me so you know who I am. You can relate. So I work at Expedia as a senior product manager within the global marketing org. And I have two amazing boys who keep me active. I'm a lifelong student of 3 M's: music, math, and mindfulness. Math is the part that brought me to computer science and eventually to product management. And I'm a student of mindfulness, and I try to apply mindfulness in product management. So as a product manager, I've been fortunate to launch several products from ground up in startup and corporate environments. So today, I'm here to share my learnings on some of the patterns identified and how you can structure some of the discovery that you do as a product manager when you're launching new products. How many of you have actually launched greenfield products, like really brand new products from scratch? 3, 4. Wow, that's a great number of people, considering it's almost like 25%. So I think greenfield products, new products, they all start with a discovery. As you know, product management is a continuous discovery process, and you may have heard about this. What that means is new customer insights unfold, and you learn more about the market, your competitive landscape shift. In this ever-changing environment, when do you really know that you have learned enough so you can start framing your first MVP, right? So that's what I'm about to share today, about how you can structure this discovery process. So you can let yourself go broad into an ever diverging set of opportunities or learnings, but also converge at some point so that you can start defining the next step. Because unless you launch something, you're not going to learn, right? So how can you balance the divergence and convergence in a structured way? So the outline of this session today is I'm going to walk you through 5 steps that I have found common in this product discovery process. And for each step, I will share a framework that I found most valuable. And to make this step or this whole process more meaningful, more realistic, I'm going to share an example. And then I'll sum it up. And then we'll open the forum for any questions. So the first step, as is so obvious, is you want to start with the goal, right? You cannot emphasize enough of how important it is to starting with the goal in mind. I have often been in discussions, I have often been in new jobs, when you are in a meeting, one of the first few meetings, and you start hearing solutions. And that's going to bias you, that's going to make you excited and start going into the solution land. But it's so important to start with the goal, right? And what that goal means for a product manager is you want to ask your stakeholders, your leadership team, on what they really want to achieve, right? What they really want to achieve this product that you are responsible for. What was the reason that you were hired, right? And to frame this question, to make this conversation more meaningful, I found this framework really helpful. So Lewis Lin introduced this, he calls it the ARM framework. So a goal comes in 4 forms for a business, especially tech business. So the question you will be asking your stakeholder is, do you want to grow your business, right? In startup companies, growing user base is important. Let's say you're first launching your product, it's your new app. You just want to grow your user base, right? It's really important because that's what's going to help you validate your hypothesis. It will help you get more funding. So growing users is really important. But just growing them is not important, right? You want them to be active. So the next category of goal is, do you really want to increase the active or activated customers in your product? For a company like Uber, the first activity is to schedule your first ride, right? Or it could be writing your first review or upgrading from a free to a paid membership. So that's the first meaningful activity that really gets you into the product. So is your goal to grow that, right? Based on the type of product or based on the type of company, that might be really meaningful to you. The third type of goal is retention. As you know, retaining an existing customer is much easier than acquiring a new customer, right? And to retain the customer, what you want is you want to improve their engagement. You want to see if they are happy using your product. Are they really using your product, right? So the goal could be, based on what you're responsible for, is to improve the engagement, right? So a product manager responsible for the video aspect of a Facebook might be really the engagement. Like, are they really watching videos, right? So engagement is a big deal. The fourth and most important is the revenue, right? Any business runs with revenue. So based on what phase of the business you are in, growing revenue could be really important. Right, to give an example, as I promised, I want to give an example for each of this. Let's say I'm a new product manager for a marketing organization, and I have been hired to develop a content platform for them, right? And so I start on my first day of the job, I ask my boss, what is the goal for my product, right? And then I ask the same questions to my other stakeholders, maybe the marketing managers or the marketing lead, or based on the type of the org, maybe even the CEO. Like, what is it really that you want to derive from this particular content platform? And my learning was the goal is to really increase the marketing revenue through the content. So the company is established, growing users is not an issue. What really matters is I want to really increase the revenue, because we're spending a lot of money in marketing, and I want to make sure that I get the ROI that I intend from this specific business line. So once I have this, right, it makes my life so much easier. It grounds me in reality. It centers me, right? Every conversation that I will have moving forward, I'm going to point back to this goal. What is really that we are trying to achieve? This will help me resolve conflicts. This will help me address some of the trade-offs that I will have. So starting with the goal, right? The first step. So now that I have this hook, I have this anchor, the next step I found helpful is to start with a blank canvas. What that means is, as I said, when you join an organization or company, the first thing you will hear is, hey, have you explored this solution, right? Start with a blank canvas. Unbias yourself from the confirmation biases that you will get. Because the moment you hear a solution, your brain is going to start revolving around that. So starting with a blank canvas kind of helps you focus more on the problem space than the solution space. And you want to paint this canvas with 4 fundamental questions. Who's the customer? What are their top problems? How are they solving today? And then how does success look like? So once you start with this, you're really focusing on the problem statement. You're really focusing on who are you solving it for, right? And the best way to drive this is to start with a product canvas. You may have heard of product canvas. There's plenty of templates available freely on Google. Pick one that suits you. But starting with the product canvas on a new initiative is a great way to make sure you have the right problem statement. In this case, yeah, go ahead.
Is there a typical scale of the product for which you deem all this necessary, or do you do this for pretty much every small increments that you do?
I find this usually for a larger initiative, right? Usually I wouldn't have a product canvas for an initiative like a small story, right? A canvas is useful for something where you're launching from scratch, or you're going to have a big overhaul on an existing product which is going to require significant resources. So in some ways, product canvas is a tool to make a business case. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the product canvas lets you answer who are your customer, is it end user, buyer, how what are their top problems, how they solve today, and then what does success look like, right? So these 4 problems are really important. And then 2 auxiliary areas that you could start exploring is what resources do you have, right? You may already have a team or you may not have a team, right? Based on that, you can start framing some of these problems accordingly. You may find out that there is a team, there's a team of SMEs that are the ones that are going to guide you, right? So it's good to have that here in your canvas so you can start conversing with them. Depending on the complexity of the organization and the complexity of the product, you will kind of start filling in this canvas. If it's a small team, you just go start talking with them, right? Start interviewing your customers, internal customers, your partners, or whatever the stakeholders are. If it's a big org, if it's a cross-team, geographically diverse org, then it makes sense to schedule an inception, maybe a half-day, full-day inception, and then bring all of them together in one room, ideally, and then use that to fill in this canvas. So what I found helpful in a kind of a more complex project or a complex org, it makes sense to schedule 2 to 4 weeks in advance and invite all the stakeholders that are really important for this problem. And then once you schedule that, then it acts as a forcing function for you, right? Let's say I schedule something 3 weeks from now. Now I have a deadline, right? I have a team of people maybe flying in from different places. So it kind of forces me to do my homework before that inception to fill in this canvas. And to make the best use of that opportunity where you have these people coming in, make sure you have one-off conversations with those stakeholders beforehand, right? So you're not meeting them for the first time. You're not asking really basic questions during that inception. You're going really deep one-on-one with some of the stakeholders. You're going deep one-on-one with some of your subject matter experts who know a lot about this field. You're also starting to have conversation with some of the engineering leads who may have solutions. I know we don't want to go to solutions, but they may have some services which may have tried to solve these problems in the past. So it's good to have all these conversations beforehand so you have a big knowledge base built in before that inception. And what I found useful is to actually start having a visual, like make a visual of how the system works today. Because believe me, if you don't do this, the inception is going to be all about asking questions and trying to understand the thing that everyone already knows in silos. Because these teammates that you invited are coming from different backgrounds. So they may be expert in their field, but they may not have the big picture. It's your job to bring that collective knowledge together in a way that everyone can understand. So drawing visual is a great way. It doesn't have to be fancy. Draw a whiteboard. Draw kind of a flow chart, workflow, whatever is suitable for the current system, and get all the data points together. So let's say in this particular case, right, it's about a content platform. What is the revenue for each channel, each marketing channel, and what is the current investment in content? Get all of the data points ready. So go ahead.
I was just wondering, is the product canvas, so let's say your problem was revenue or something like that, right?
Yep.
So it's not really a customer problem that customers are getting what they need out of the product, it's just a business problem. So in that case, would you use a different canvas or would you just replace customers with the business or something like that?
Could you maybe exemplify that? Like,
I mean, sure, like you have a very successful product that a lot of people are using. Let's say, Facebook was
right.
5 years ago or
Yep.
whatever, right? Where they hadn't really started,
Sure.
Advertisement and stuff.
Yep.
And, like customers loved it, but the business wasn't making money intentionally.
Yep.
They
Sure.
wanted to go to now the goal is maximize our revenue and maximize profitability.
Right.
In that case, you don't have like a customer problem you're solving. It's more like it's a business problem that the customers are creating.
Well, so problem is kind of a placeholder for an opportunity. What is the customer opportunity is what we're really saying here. So if I understand your question correctly, what you're saying is, let's say Facebook is transitioning from being a free product to a paid product or monetized product. What would the canvas look like? Is that what you're saying? So you're saying the goal is still to monetize, grow revenue.
Yeah.
I think it will still be the same framework. But at that point, I'm sure Facebook will have different product lines, and there will be a product manager for each of the areas. So there might be one for the app, right? There might be one for the events area. So let's say I am for the events area, right? So then my customers are the moms who wants to schedule a birthday for her kid, right? And or a teacher who want to have a reunion. So you still have those customers here, right? And then in this canvas might be bigger, or you may have multiple canvases for each of the customer, but you still use the same framework. So with that, let's say you keep that mom as one of your customers, then what are her problems? It's kind of hard to communicate with the attendees, and not all of them might have Facebook and so on, right? So you go from there, and then how do they solve today? They may still invite them through email and half through Facebook. So you still have that canvas to help you frame the problems, right?
We can take it offline, but like nobody said like not having ads in my Facebook feed was a problem.
Right. Got it.
I've used something similar. It's called a problem canvas. It's geared, like he said, to a step before this, where you're asking your stakeholders to define the problem from their own perspective. You're also asking them to define it from the perspective of their prospective users. And then you may realize that it's not one product that's going to solve your problem. And then you come up with the array of questions and products, and then for each of those, I'm guessing you would have to do something like this, which is a product canvas.
Yep. So, yeah, so this is a framework, right? It evolves based on the type of product you are building. And this is just an example. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So in the case of the content platform, right, I think for me what I learned was my customers were the end users who actually see that marketing communication. My marketing managers were the customers. They were one of the main customers, if you will. The creative team who is building that content, right, the imagery, videos, text, and what have you. And then finally the data scientist. The data scientists who are trying to personalize some of this content, or the data scientists who are trying to make this content more relevant to some of the users, right? And the 3 or 4 problems that I identified were that this communication isn't impactful and relevant to users. And then from marketing managers' point of view, it's hard to ingest new content. And then from the analyst point of view, it was hard to kind of run A/B test efficiently. And then it was almost impossible to relate the impact of a content for a specific segment, right? Again, these are examples, and the real canvas look much kind of bigger, and maybe I might have different different sections based on different users. But this is just to give an example of how now you're starting to frame the problems, and we haven't yet talked about the solution. And then we have some visibility on how they solve it today. This is really important because maybe some processes are broken and it's just a process fix and not a product fix. So it's really important to kind of get a visibility there. And then the success, right? Obviously, it's more evolved than just saying that we want to increase revenue by 10% within 12 months. But this helps you determine at the end of 12 months, how does success look like, right? And then this canvas is a way to also build alignment. You are working with your stakeholders. You're working with your business leaders and signing off on what the success looks like. So at the end of 12 months, when you have a conversation, it's so much easier because that's what you started. It also helps you stay focused. So now that you have this canvas, then you can start exploring the opportunities. Again, it's not the solutions. I'm still not about solution. The step 3 is to mind map the opportunities that map to the goal. So starting with a broad set of opportunities help you not get siloed into one solution, because you're in discovery and you want to make sure that you go broad before you start going deep. So I'll use this opportunity framework formalized by Teresa Torres. So as you can see on the top, you have the goal that we agreed on, or the OKR. And then based on the problems, remember we said content wasn't meaningful, and then we found that it was hard to get some of the content, it was hard to measure it. Based on those problems, we start identifying opportunities that we believe that if we address this opportunity, then we will actually improve the goal that we talked about. And this is a living and breathing framework. So what you're saying is, these are the opportunities as it stands today. as you learn more, you can keep on adding. So whenever you have a conversation with the business leaders, it's so much easier to say, look, this is what we know so far. If you have a new idea, if you hear something in the hallway, you're going to add it here. So you're being inclusive, but at the same time, you have a structure on your discovery process. And then at the first level, you're kind of more at the broad level of opportunities, but as you go kind of deeper, then you can start having some solutions. So for the new content, I can have first-party content or I can have third-party content. But for first-party content, I need really good configuration tools for my creative team. So that's where I kind of start getting into solutioning. And then for third-party content, I may need APIs to ingest that data at scale, right? So now that I have this framework that is aligned, that is at least potentially aligned with the goal, I can take it to the next level and start highlighting the opportunities that I think have immediate impact on the goal. So based on the problems, so it's more art than science. You want to do both quantitative and qualitative analysis to start kind of prioritizing some of these opportunities. So the qualitative part is you are going through the customer use cases, and then you're finding that customers are unsubscribing the emails, the marketing emails, right? So that's kind of the qualitative part of it. Quantitative part of it is maybe an email that has the same content, it doesn't have a good click-through rate, right? So that there's the quantitative part. You go through your marketing channel performance and identify where the gap is, where you're losing revenue, or where you should be having a lot of revenue, but you're not getting one. So use that to start highlighting ones that have immediate impact. So we identified that the new content definitely is a big deal, because if people don't find that content meaningful to them, it's not going to make them engage, and that's not going to generate revenue. The personalization went hand in hand, because you can have an awesome content, but if it's not relevant, what's the point? So that's why we identified the segmentation part of it as a P1. And then our goal was to deliver 10% higher revenue in 12 months. But ingesting new content was a slow process. So having a scalable solution was equally important, right? But kind of less important than new content, because we can always find more people maybe, or we can test with new content before we can start scaling it. So now that you have this framework or a narrower set of opportunities, remember you started broad and now you're starting to narrow down. It's time to find out your common denominator, right? What that means is you have a few opportunities that you think are really promising. It's based on data, based on your interviews with stakeholders. Now flesh out some of the narrower use cases, right? And that's where you get into the story world, right? That's where you start writing user stories. But you're going to evaluate them against 3 criteria: how aligned they are with the goal, what prerequisites do you need to deliver this user story. The prerequisite is often in tech products, the tech solutions you need. It may be the new service or the API, or maybe a new UI module that you need to build, or you may need a new app. Whatever it is, that's your prerequisite. Or it could be a license that you need with the third-party vendors. Or you may need to train your support team. All of that goes into the prerequisites. And then the 4th one is the effort. This is a relative sizing to get that user story or use case actually launched to the users. So going back to that content platform, right? Remember we identified 3 opportunities, right? So within each opportunities, we started fleshing out some of the use cases that actually deliver that opportunity. So from a content point of view, image is a big deal, right? When you see an ad, image is one of the most important aspect of an ad. The second one, and this one was for a travel product, so a deal is important, right? Who doesn't want 20% off their next hotel? And the last but not least was the coupons, right? Coupons has been highly successful based on the past marketing data. So now we're starting to go into kind of a more narrow or more crisp use cases, right, that are tied to each opportunity. Same thing with personalizations, family and business travelers. Those were the top kind of use cases. And then from a platform point of view, scaling the content ingestion was one of the use cases. And then you start scoring those against a goal alignment. Your job is to offer the framework to your team. You don't have to fill in all the scoring. even though you can start with your own judgment about this scoring, depending on what kind of use case it is, what kind of stakeholder it is, you actually use their judgment to score this. You could use data as well. You may find out that images have the highest impact on an ad based on a research that was done by someone, right? So you could use that as a data point. So you have the scoring for goal alignment. The next one is the prerequisite that I talked about. To me, that's the most important criteria in evaluating the common denominator, and I'll explain why. So as you can see, when we went through these use cases and we started having conversation with the engineering team, we figured that the asset repository is a component that we need no matter what. We need to build a service that will be able to get that content and kind of deliver it into the marketing communication. So we started realizing that asset repository is the common denominator, at least from a technology point of view. And then we had the efforts based on engineering and kind of other stakeholders. So with that data in mind, it was so easy for us to identify that having an asset repository for images was the thing that we should really start with. Because no matter what, we have to build an asset repository. And then image is like 70% of the real estate. So we got to start with that. You use this framework to build an alignment with the stakeholders. So you are not making this decision in silo. So later, when this hypothesis fails, you are not the only person responsible for this. You also have the collective wisdom of all the teammates that are working with them. So your job is to not make decisions. Your job is to offer a framework so you make the right decisions, or you focus on the right bets. It is still a bet. No one knows the future. It is still a bet, but your job is to invest in the best bet, right? And with this exercise, we identified that the image repository or asset repository for image was the best bet that we should start. So we're getting to the last step. So now that we have this use cases, right? That's where we define. That's where I think we are ready to define our MVP, right? So as you saw, that we have a very clear, I shouldn't say clear, we have a much more confident guess at what we should invest first. That's where we can start defining your MVP. The goal of an MVP, I like this visual I borrowed from the Noun project. It shows that MVP is part of something bigger, right? It's small, it's smaller than your North Star, but it is not a silo. It's not something that you have to backtrack, right? So the way I think of MVP is as 4 parts. You have a hypothesis that says if we did this, then we will improve X because of X reason. So that's one part. That's really an important part. And it's also very important to state it as a hypothesis, because then you are being humble and say, look, this is what I think. I may be wrong, but I'm going to do my best I'm going to do my best effort to maximize my learning so I can fail fast and move on. The second is the story. This component describes what is the end user experience, right? The third part is the acceptance criteria. This is where it gets into the specification part of it. Like story is more high level, but acceptance criteria goes into detail. Like what does that mean? Like what is the latency and what kind of error rate you are okay with and things like that. And the fourth and the most important part is the metric. Like what is that metric that you're going to measure in the MVP that you think will move needle, that you think maps directly with the goal that you started in step 1. So going back to that image asset repository that we talked about, my hypothesis was if we can show fresh, relevant images in our marketing campaigns, then we will engage users into our ads, because images set the first impression of an ad. And then the story is, as a marketing manager, I want to inspire users with fresh, relevant images so that I can effectively promote the product. Some people think that story should be written by user in mind, and that's completely fine. You can rewrite that, reframe it as end user in mind. I like to keep my immediate customer in mind, because then it helps me understand what I need to do from an acceptance criteria. So then the acceptance criteria is, as a marketing manager, I need at least 5 different images for the top 1,000 destinations. It's a travel product, so I want to have images for those. And then the resolution needs to be XYZ. this doesn't need to come from you. Maybe you rely on the experts, right? Maybe you look into industry data, what's the most optimal resolution for phones versus how it looks aesthetically and so on. And then the fourth is, for me, the click to open rate was the most important metric, because an image or the job of an image is to entice user into clicking on it. But if the user never opened that email, she never saw that image. So then that's not the metric you could track. So that's why click to open is important. But most importantly, after that is, did they convert, right? You just don't want to get a lot of users showing those awesome images, but they didn't do anything. So the conversion is also equally important, because remember, conversion drives the revenue, and revenue is our main goal that we are driving towards, right? So once you have this MVP, you have done something really powerful. What you have done is you have equipped your engineering team with a crisp definition, with a crisp acceptance criteria. And even though you will be engaged with them through daily stand-ups, you don't have to be so hands-on anymore, right? You did your first part of discovery, and now you're free with your VNext discovery. Remember, it's a continuous discovery process. Your job is never done, but you at least had a meaningful milestone, right? You don't get paid for doing a discovery all day long, right? You get paid for delivering value on an incremental basis. And this is, to me, is the most fulfilling moment, where you define an MVP, and then the engineering team is excited to work on it, and then they have a very clear acceptance criteria, so they know what they are working towards. Plus, they also have the metric. So once they deliver it, once they launch this product, or once the marketing manager launches an A/B test, they know what to compare between the control and the test, because you gave them a clear metric. And once you have this, as I said, you can start working on your VNext. So this process you can continue and repeat, not just for MVP, but for VNext as well. And that's pretty much it. So thank you very much again.
One question. So on the last topic, once you launch the user story, let's say you're tracking the primary and secondary factors in production, and trying to see if your needs.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear.
So let's say you've launched the user story and you're trying to track the metrics in production and see if the users are actually doing as much as we expected to. What happens in the event that the user story doesn't pan out or doesn't give you the results that you expected from a metric standpoint?
Yeah.
Do you go back to the drawing board, or do you basically pick the next one in the hypothesis list and start working?
You kind of go back to the drawing board, right? And that's where you have to make the pivot versus continue. So in this case, for the images, actually our metric didn't meet. The test actually was a loser. And we realized that we had not set up the campaign correctly. And some of the images, remember I said 5 images for each. Some of the images within those 5, they were not quality images, right? So then we ran another test with maybe picking only the top image, right? Or we actually built a machine learning model to use some aesthetic score and use previous performance data to pick only maybe 2 images. And then that test had a much better outcome. So the goal of an MVP, more than anything, is to maximize learning, right? What you're saying is, I have this hypothesis, but I know that this is what is out there. And when you actually throw this into the wild, when you launch this, you're going to come up with this much learning. And then you learn that, hey, by the way, the image was really good, but our resolution was higher than the previous images. So even though it was a better quality, the load time actually impacted the CTO, right? Those are the type of insights you are usually not going to guess before launching the MVP. So to your question, you go back to the drawing board. And that's why in your backlog, the MVP is kind of in progress, and then the deals and coupon is kind of in scoping, that you're kind of discovering it. But this expectation you are setting is, I'm only exploring those. Anytime this MVP doesn't execute well, that is still my priority. Even if the use case actually succeeds, right? Before that, you will hit a lot of roadblocks, right? You will wake up one day just to get an email that someone left the job, your lead engineer left the job. Are you going to continue on the next use case, or are you going to come back to MVP and try to resolve that, right? So your MVP will continue to be your top priority, but now that that's executing, you start focusing on some of the next use cases and focus more time on discovery.
So then, because you started off with the goal in mind, and if your MVP is progressively in progress, it may take a lot longer to reach your desired goals than you initially set out to reach, right? So then, how do you sort of try to make meaningful progress on the goal itself while the MVP is in perpetual?
Lot longer compared to what, I guess, is what I would like to understand.
So let's say if your goal was to increase revenue by 50% or 100% or whatever.
Yeah.
Let's say you define 5 user stories to get to that stage.
Got it.
And each user story you're encountering a bunch of roadblocks, or you're encountering failed metrics or whatnot. And if, let's say, you wanted to hit the revenue goal in a year, for example, and now with these learnings that you've had by launching the user stories, you realize it's going to take longer than that.
Yeah.
How do you course correct? How do you keep sure that you are sort of making progress on the goal?
Right. So that's why we have this quarterly product reviews or business reviews, right? Where we not only have the annual goal, but we also have quarterly goals. So maybe the first quarter's goal was to just have one test win, right? And that if you failed, right, if the test failed, then that's where you have a hard conversation. So a few things can happen at that point where you could say, we're going to reset the expectation, we're going to reset the goal based on our current learning. Or you could say, we have been delayed because of these 3 reasons, but now we have data points to bring to the leadership team, and then maybe they add more resources, or maybe they figure out that your experiment was correct, but the type of images, the quality of images you got were not up to the mark, right? And they may get you a better source, or they may invest more in that license. So again, back to what I mentioned earlier is your goal is to bring the clarity as much as possible and as early as possible in the process, so that you can make that pivot decision. Your job is to inform the leadership team to make the right decisions in right time.
Just to bounce off from what you said, we live in a messy world, right? So when you design an experiment, you look at the variables that change and then the constant, the dependent and the independent.
Yeah.
So one assumption we tend to make is the world around us doesn't change.
Yes.
So, yeah, right? So when you have competitors launch ads just like you, and you're not getting a click-through rate that you like, it's not because your hypothesis was a failure, it's probably because the world changed around you.
Other factors,
right? So how do you trust the data from experiments when you just look at the experiment itself and not the world around you?
Totally. So specific to experiments, it's really important to have a very clean A/B test, right? So the control versus the variance, it's important they are as much equal as possible. So because your control and your test had everything else same but the thing that you're testing, even if the competition changed or if there was a calamity, natural calamity somewhere, they should impact both the variants the same, right? So that's one thing. But what you're talking about is not within that experiment. What you're saying is, we figure out, hey, you know what, no one looks at images anymore. Videos are the big deal, right? But remember, we have that opportunity framework. You're keeping it green, right? You're keeping that framework. The moment you have market insights that in the next 1 to 2 years, people are going to shift from images to videos, you update your framework. And then your next quarterly business reviews, guess what is on the top of your priority list, right? Or your highlighted opportunity videos. But you were intentional about your framework as well, the common denominator I mentioned, remember we built an asset repository. It didn't say it's an image asset repository, even though it was, the MVP was image asset. But engineering team, if you give them the right framework and if you keep them posted about your learnings, they are also seeing that, hey, look, video is an opportunity. So they are smart enough to keep their solution future-proof enough so that the same technology can then be leveraged for videos. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I want to go back to the transition from the goal to some of the problem statements on Canvas. And so in this instance, or this example, the goal is to increase revenue. One of the ways to increase revenue is to reduce price.
Mm-hmm.
In this example on Canvas, none of the customer problems had anything to do with pricing. So somebody between 1 and 2 excluded pricing as a problem. So how does that happen? Where does the process that filters from the goal to the problem statement?
Yeah, so back to, first, let me answer your first question though. You mentioned, we talked about revenue, but it could be also getting the cost less, right? Is that what you say?
I mean, one way to increase revenue, in other words, a solution, is to reduce your price.
Yeah, so
It could be.
yes and no. The reason is business kind of looks at them as differently. So the top line, bottom line, or basically in that case, the goal would be to increase the gross margin, right? Or increase the net revenue, right?
In this case, the goal was to increase revenue.
In this case, it was, the goal was,
You said more competitive pricing, so you can get a bigger volume business.
right,
You
right.
said by top line, right?
Right, so I'll get to the pricing, but I just wanted to kind of clarify the revenue versus the net revenue part. So in case of marketing, it's usually primary metric is the revenue, and then you put a secondary metric as the marketing spend, which kind of gives you the net revenue, right? So the business, in this case, we're interested in, go ahead and increase the revenue, right? As long as your marketing spend is not more than that, as long as you're not going in negative, right? Because the way often it works is if you can prove that you can get higher revenue, but the spend is also high, then you can scale it, right? You can add technology to actually reduce the spend, right? So often business is more interested first in the revenue, at least in the marketing world, and then the net revenue. In this case, it was the revenue and then also keeping an eye on the spend, which is the net revenue. Going back to the price part, absolutely. I think I missed that part, but it was part of the message part. Remember I said the visual, the message, or the promotion, and then the call to action. So the promotion includes the price. And the use cases that we talked about does include the price part. So basically deals is in a way giving lower price, if that's what you were referring to.
So lowering the price is actually one of the solutions.
That's one of the solutions, right? Yeah. Coupons is also in a way you're reducing the price, right? Because you're eating up the price.
Actually, I want to bounce off on what you said. So the framework doesn't capture assumptions. If your goal is to increase revenue, what are all the assumptions you need to make?
Yeah.
The customer doesn't change. You change the pricing. There's no competitive products. So it doesn't have a space to state these assumptions and use that to create your user stories.
Yeah, and I think you can use that as part of the prerequisites, or maybe this is it's a shell. This framework is a shell. Based on the type of business, you can add one more with an assumption, right? Or it could be part of your prerequisite that this doesn't change, or we get a budget of this much dollars in coupon revenue, right? These are all part of, I would say, prerequisite or kind of a constraint that you have. And you can grow this framework with any more kind of values that you find useful.
I was also curious to know if you ever built a product to lose customers, so you know who your customers are.
You built a product to lose customer. So what is, like, I would ask, like, what is the value?
Let's say you had a coupon generating app or some product that made these coupons, right? And then you realize your customers are price sensitive and switch apps easily. So you make this thing and you see, hey, coupons are not right for our market, so we're gonna not service these customers.
Yeah, that happens all the time. In this case, the reason the coupon existed is because based on the previous coupon performance, right? So that's why it was a big fit. It was a good fit. Some other products, no, coupon may be a big failure. It may be a drain on your finance team. So yeah.
I'm a little bit confused about what the common denominator, the role that played in your MVP definition. To me, it seemed like after step 3, you go to your MVP definition based on which of the opportunities was the biggest, and then you might do some costing to see like which can be built and test quickly. But like the asset repository thing, the prerequisites, that almost seems like kind of infrastructure requirement that you identified that yes, it's common between a bunch of different features or use cases you want to go after, but I wasn't sure how that played into the MVP definition and why that needs to happen.
Got it. So in this case, so that's a good question. So common denominator in this case was based on some of the technical prerequisites, right? But there are often times when you have a lot of commonality between use cases. So I'll give an example, right? So the pricing part. Let's say you want to offer the best pricing for hotel booking, right? Now the price of a hotel changes by like 15 different parameters, as you know, right? But if you map those out, right, there's one parameter that's really peculiar, which is the date from which you book, right? So regardless of a 5-star versus 3-star hotel, or a hotel versus a vacation rental, one thing that always changes the price is, guess what? The time which you advance book your hotel, right? Because as you get closer to booking, your price is going to go up. So to me, that's a common denominator, right? So this is not a technology, but this is a use case that's going to apply to different other use cases that you identify, right? That's what I'm trying to articulate in this common denominator. And one more thing to keep in mind is this is not the only way you define your MVP. This is one way to narrow down your use cases, right? And I find this one to be the most effective, because if something changes, as you mentioned, in the market, you have built a foundation, right? And that might be because I have a engineering background, so I have a bias towards the foundation. Someone might be from a design background and he may come up with a common denominator which is more focused on a more future-proof design, right? Your goal is to build something that if your hypothesis fails, you should still be able to reuse a big part of your MVP.
I mean, another way to look at it is how do we define the MVP so that we do the minimal amount of work and not have to build that asset repository. Like, can we just kind of Wizard of Oz it and send 1 image or 5 images and see if that.
But that would be a Wizard of Oz of the repository, right? You could make something really lightweight, right? But I agree. I mean, there are a few steps before MVP, before you actually build something that you could still try. You could still create a prototype. You could fake some of these communications, right? And then test your hypothesis. Absolutely.
So you're talking about MVP. Must have taken the time frame for this feature to test out. Must have been some, say, 6 months or so. What if the engineering manager or the CEO comes and says, I don't have that much time. We need it faster. Or the resources. When you're thinking about improving features versus when you're creating a new product, there's a difference in how much time can be used.
You can have, sure.
So how do you deal with that situation?
So depending on the type of company you work with, I think that time frame and patience will change. But from the companies I work from, 6 months is a really long period. Usually within 2 months, you should have a definition of an MVP, or at least the direction you want to go with, right? Which is why we need this framework. So you can move on quickly build alignment quickly, right, and be able to kind of propose your first experiment. So that's what I think of as the time frame. And your goal is to make sure that you come up with this so that engineering manager never says that they don't have time, right?
Yeah, because I've had situations where I propose something and then it just completely gets rejected because they don't have anything.
Exactly.
And because I have technical background, I go and do something for 2-3 days, show them that this will work, and then that goes out. But when you think about something really big and game-changing, you don't have the possibility to go and do that by yourself. Or
no,
yeah,
totally. And when it is a game-changing, that means the organization has decided to kind of explore that opportunity. To some extent, you were hired because of that, right? So there is a high-level alignment on the opportunity. Your job is to bring structure to that, right? And for you to not ever get a response from engineering manager, your job is to engage them early on, right? You're not going to show this thing 2 months later. They should be the first person to know this, right? So that element of surprise is not there ever.
Or was it that the whole reason for doing the MVP is so that you don't spend 6 months building something that
Exactly.
is not going to work in the market?
And in complex orgs, in most orgs, what happens is when you hire a product manager for a new initiative, which is what we are focusing today, the org is also aligning towards that, right? So what's happening is you are just hired, but engineering team or CTO is trying to align resources. So there might be an engineering leader who would potentially work on it. So he's also or she's also wrapping her initiatives. So she has part-time job in a way, right? So she's not full-time on this yet, right? So that is actually a good thing because then you don't feel pressure that you don't have full-time work for them, right? And there are scenarios where you have a full-time team. And in that case, maybe you align your use cases, maybe align your experimentation so that it's more around building prototypes that you mentioned, right? That they are building some things that are not going live, so they don't have to worry about building something perfect. So they can write more services, they can write more prototypes because they have that time at hand. And that actually is a great way to validate your hypothesis sooner. Some of the opportunities that we discussed, and then we did some of that qualitative analysis that could now be actually validated through some quick prototypes that they could be building.
So I'm referring to this framework again. Suppose
This one?
This one. So suppose you identified all the use cases and you identified the goal alignment and they're in increasing order, and more often than not the effort is typically inversely proportional to the use cases and the revenue that's going to generate. Like a higher value use case would typically have a higher effort.
Yes.
There are exceptions, right?
Yeah.
And what you do is you go into the middle column and you identify what's the prerequisite, what's the common denominator,
Yeah.
and you know that you need to build this no matter what use case you become, right?
Yeah.
But what if that thing that you're building in the middle, in this case asset repository, is not enough on its own to show you any results? I mean, the goal is to create revenue, right? So if you're building these small building blocks of your product, but eventually you don't have the whole thing which will make revenue, how do you go about it?
Yeah. The goal is to make revenue, that's the North Star. But the immediate goal for you as an MVP is to maximize learning in the shortest amount of time. Should I go this way or that way or this way so that I reach my North Star? That's the goal, right? So there are two ways to do this, right? One is basically these use cases can be narrowed down, right, to make sure that you kind of validate those. And then when you go to the acceptance criteria, I always think that the acceptance criteria is a negotiation. It's a beginning of a conversation. You are saying, for me to validate this hypothesis, I need these three things, right? But if it's too much, right, that's where you negotiate and say, okay, what can we cut so that we can launch this within 2 weeks or a month rather than 3 months, right? In my last many years of experience, I have always been able to find ways to cut down the scope and still been able to keep the learning opportunity the same. And the more you focus, the more you think about that problem, you will always find some resourceful ways to cut down on the solution. You could always reduce the scope. Instead of launching this to all the markets, you could say, I'm going to launch only to this customer segment. And then that reduces your AWS cost, right? You can always say, I'm not going to make this scalable. I'm going to make it a one-time launch or something, because you don't care about repeatability right now. I'm just giving examples, and that's where you engage your engineering team. Many of these things will come from engineering, not from you, because you have equipped them with the North Star, you have equipped them with the different opportunities. They're going to the one who's going to say, hey, you know what, we don't even need to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to use this Excel file instead of a database, and I'm going to figure out if we can kind of launch this.